Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. It's titled that I give you a welcome, but some of the things I might say to you this morning might not be that welcome, but nonetheless, I'll say them anyway. The situation that we see ourselves in at the moment is, if we look back to 2021, it was the best year in sheep and beef profitability in 40 years. If we look at this year, then it's likely to be the worst in 15 years. And for most of you that are looking at your P&L at the moment, for most of you there's red ink in it. And so what I thought I would do is just talk about the combination of things that are driving that at the moment. So obviously there's a market aspect to it. There's a cost aspect in terms of what's happening in your budget, whether it's inflationary costs or whether it's interest costs. And then thirdly, you've been beset over the last probably 6 years with a bunch of regulatory costs. So I just want to give you a quick, overview of how we see those things, or how I see them at the moment. So from a market perspective, we really operate in sort of three theatres: Asia, which is dominated by China, Europe and the US. And I guess China at the moment, you'll be well aware, is pretty subdued. What is it? It's a combination of them failing to spark as they recover out of COVID. There was a lot of hope held for what Chinese New Year might bring, and that has been subdued again. So what are the issues there? They have an economically challenging situation in terms of the property market, in terms of unemployment, and that economy struggling to take off. From a supply perspective, there is increasing, there's strong inventory there, but really increasing competition, particularly from South America and Australia as well, who's had a really strong 4 or 5 years of rebuilding their herd and is now selling down that herd. The other, if we go over to Europe, Europe is really challenged economically. And so what we've seen there, particularly from a meat consumption perspective, people downgrading in their purchases. We've been through this process of Brexit, and what we've seen on both sides, whether it be the UK or Europe, a really strong emphasis on buy local, so a doubling down on local product. The other thing that we did see, and this was one of the key drivers of the 21-22 profitability, is that during COVID, people massively stocked up on inventory of product. And that was around uncertainty around supply chains and their inability to get product. And so particularly in Europe, we've been eating our way through that backlog, which again has been one of the drivers of low demand. The other thing is that we've seen is that the Australians have now got access into the UK, and particularly for sheep meat, they're starting to compete in there. But what I have to say is that I'm slightly positive in the Europe and UK bit, is that we believe we've reached the bottom, particularly in terms of sheep meat pricing, and we see that starting to lift. If we go into North America, then North America continues to be strong, both on the sheep meat side. We do have competition again on the sheep meat side out of Australia, but on the beef side, it's very, very strong there. The US is one of the most, the unique developed country in the world, in that while most developed countries drop their consumption of red meat, the US continues to elevate it over time. So it's a massively good market for us. So really, if we look at beef prices overall, and it's a beef dominant day today, beef is sitting about on the 5-year average in terms of pricing, but it's really sheep meat that is dragging the chain at the moment. And we just quickly gloss over wool because we don't get a levy for wool, so we don't talk about it at Beef and Lamb New Zealand. On the trade side, we're entering a different phase of trade. So the last probably 20 odd years has been dominated by new FTAs. When we finish the EU FTA, which will probably be mid of this year, we'll have 77% of our markets covered by free trade agreements. So it's an awesome achievement by our Trade Department and MPI, who have been working on that for the last few years. There are a couple of bumps in that at the moment. The US sheep industry has been trying to get import restrictions put on New Zealand and Australian product coming into that market. One of those, I suppose, legal challenges has been withdrawn, but one is still ongoing. So our people in Washington, along with MFAT and MPI, are watching that very closely. The other one that's come on the horizon just in the last, I suppose, couple of months is the EU putting in restrictions around deforestation of particularly beef or land that's producing beef internationally. And so that's potentially an added cost for our value chains in terms of accessing that market when it comes. A lot of talk about India and the potential there. Not much potential for beef, but a very strong potential for sheep meat. But that one is likely to be a slow burn and take quite a bit of time to surface, maybe 5 to 10 years. One of the challenges as we move away from FTAs is that there are a whole lot of non-tariff barriers put in the way. And at the moment, we've got about $500 million of non-tariff barriers sitting inside our markets. And so that is a focus now for us working with government, with the Meat Industry Association, is how we start to knock those off, because at the end of the day, that affects our processors' costs and affects your bottom line as well. The other key area where we're quite focused on internationally is there are a lot of policy decisions being made internationally that drive costs into our markets or access restrictions and also cost back domestically. So those are things like climate change, they're things like sustainability, they're things like nutrition. What else did I have here? Animal welfare. Those are all things that are often happening in the European theatre, and those costs get passed back to us. And so Beef and Lamb New Zealand, working with like livestock industries internationally, are putting a lot of effort into that to try and manage that risk. And COP was a classic example of where we got heavily involved in the last one, along with partner industries from Canada, US, Australia. And we were able to actually get quite a different dialogue around livestock and the recognition that livestock is important both socially, economically, and as part of nutrition globally. So we're starting to shift that one. On the domestic side, obviously, we've been through a couple of years of high inflation, 10% 2 years ago, 16% last year, and we're forecasting 5% this year. But the reality is that cost that built up over the last couple of years is not disappearing out of your business. We're in a different phase of high costs in our businesses now, and that's a significant challenge. We've got a new government, and I think a lot of people have felt optimistic about the new government in terms of some of the rhetoric that's come out of there, particularly in the regulatory space. But the reality is we've seen little tangible yet. And so, on your behalf, we're continuing to advocate quite strongly on that. The clear message we've got from farmers is that you want to hear our voice more strongly on your behalf, and secondly, that you want us as the voice advocating on sheep and beef, on behalf of sheep and beef farmers. So just let me very quickly step through a few positions in terms of our policy, and as I talk to you today, very happy to hear your feedback on that. So when it comes to climate change, we're very firm that there's no justification for pricing farmers for emissions. Secondly, we believe that the targets set in legislation for methane reductions aren't scientifically based and they're not right. And thirdly, we believe that farmers absolutely should get recognition for the sequestration that is happening on their farms. If we talk about freshwater, the government has said that they're going to do the freshwater, redo the freshwater regulations. Our view is that some of the national bottom lines absolutely need to be changed, that farm plans, rather than being mandatory, should be voluntary and risk-based. The slow map and fencing requirements still have work to be done on them to make them fit for purpose. And the last thing is, and you've been telling us as farmers, that you absolutely need certainty and a regulatory environment that's enduring and allows you to make investment decisions for the future. If we talk about biodiversity, significant natural areas is still a definition that needs to be sorted. It's far too wide. And secondly, you as farmers are doing awesome work in terms of looking after biodiversity, and that needs to be recognised in some way by wider society. The reality is that we do have opportunities to influence more with the new government, and the thing that we'll be doing a lot more is that coming and talking to you as farmers about what is actually going to work for you in the future. So last week we just put out a survey around farm planning with a few things to get feedback on. As of Monday, we had 650 farmers that have responded to that, and that's really valuable information for us to represent you. We've heard the challenge around telling your story better domestically, and so over the last year we've seen, working with Beef and Lamb Inc., the launch of the Stacey Walker campaign, and over the next year we'll be really elevating the farmer part of that story, because at the end of the day you produce the product that gets on those shelves. The second bit of good news is that we've signed a deal with the New Zealand Olympic Committee as a partner. And so this year you'll see launched a campaign which is farmers feeding the fern, so to speak. And so that'll be another good opportunity to really drive the farmer story. I guess the most fundamental challenge is the one that I started with, is that not just today but over a considerable period of time, is that our sheep and beef farm profitability is just not where it needs to be. And I guess the challenge that we see and that farmers have given to us as Beef and Lamb New Zealand is how can we find that next leap in productivity and profitability that gives you an enduring sheep and beef business into the future. So there's two areas where we're really lifting our investment. The first, so over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been lifting our R&D investment. Big focus in facial eczema and internal parasites. We're about to hopefully complete a large bobby calf project, which will be looking at the benefits that flow through to the beef industry as well. On the extension side, we're going to be making a significant investment increase in the whole extension business, and that's going to be based around focus farms, around small groups that we know are really powerful in terms of lifting farmer confidence to make decisions and profitability and productivity on the bottom line. So you'll see that happening in the near future. And so then to today's topic, which is about genetics. If there's one free lunch in farming, in my mind, it's genetics. Genetics is genetic gain is permanent and cumulative, but at the same time, genetic loss is the same. And so for us, genetics is Beef and Lamb's largest enduring investment. And if we look at the part that genetics has played in our industry, I have to say genetics in our sheep industry has played an amazing part in lifting our productivity and profitability over the time. It's my personal view that if we look at the beef industry, we just haven't had those same gains. And so that's why Beef and Lamb New Zealand, you'll hear about INZB today, that's why Beef and Lamb New Zealand is investing in INZB. And I just want to acknowledge the investment that MPI, there's some MPI staff here in the room today, acknowledge the investment that MPI has put into it, and also a significant investment of breeders and farmers nationally to make this program happening. So whether it's our 900,000 beef cows or 4.5 million dairy cows, we need to ensure that we're finding the genetics that are the most profitable to use in that. And so what this is what this program's about. INZB is about finding those genetics, demonstrating the value of genetics, and ensuring that farmers have the knowledge, the tools and confidence to make the most profitable breeding decisions. So as I said, our partnership with breeding groups and farmers is absolutely critical in that, and I just want to thank those people in the room today that are invested in that program and supporting that program. So lastly, a special thanks to Steve and the Lochinver ownership and staff today for hosting us. We really appreciate, wherever Steve is, I can't see Steve, sorry mate, you're here. Really appreciate the investment that you're making in the partnership with us, and look forward to spending the day with you. And I'm going to be here for the duration of the day, so knock me up with any questions or suggestions that you have. Thank you.
So moving on, I'll now introduce Steve Smith, the Lochinver and Rimanui Business Manager. So Steve's just going to give an introduction to the station and also the involvement with the Informing New Zealand Beef Program and Progeny Test.
Sweet. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all on this nice day down at Lochinver. I'd like to say the weather's a bit better than this normally, but this is kind of us on the Ringatyke. Just to give you, I suppose, a bit of an introduction to the farm, talk a little bit about health and safety. I'll introduce you to my crew who are kind of hiding out there. But yeah, first and foremost, we had 50 mils of rain yesterday, or over the last kind of 48 hours anyway. So when we're travelling around, there might be a few humps and hollows made their way into the pumice. So just take care. Kind of vehicles are probably our biggest risk on this place anyway. So we're going to be kind of in a convoy. You won't be getting in and out. We're going to a certain point, so there shouldn't be too many issues. Probably the other thing is just appropriate footwear. Like, I kind of look around and see a few sets of RMs and stuff, but you'll probably need your gumboots and stuff when we get out to the cattle yards. There are big bits of pumice and stuff to negotiate. That's kind of the health and safety stuff, like the major risks that we'll see today. Just in terms of my team who are going to be here or around, I've got Glenn Robinson. Just poke your head in, Glenn. He's my farm technical manager, handles cropping, data collection, all the good stuff. I've got James Alford, who's my farm operations manager. So he's been with Rimanui a little while now. I poached him from Erawan. And I've got Alan Maher, who's the stock manager out the back of the farm that handles most of the breeding stock and in particular the cows that we've got in the Progeny Test program. Are you going to be around today as well? No, he's off, so you won't ask him. But feel free to ask those guys any questions. They know it all. This is kind of the senior management group. So if I just direct you to the map, probably to get you a bit of a feel for the scale of the place. We're 9,500 hectares effective, 13,000 in total. So that 13,000 isn't actually on here. We've kind of got 2,000 hectares out the south side, which isn't on here, which is undeveloped land. So this is the state highway. So we've got 2,500 hectares on the north side of the state highway, the balance of the farms on the south. To give you a bit of a breakdown of stock and staff, we run about 32,000 ewes, Romney base, and 2,000 Angus cows. We're breeding finishing. We do store a few lambs, but we typically take all the cattle progeny through and finish them. On the north side of the road, it's probably slightly more intensive. We've got 1,100 bulls over there now and kind of 2,400 mate or maid grazers, which is, over here is probably slightly developed longer in terms of time frame, better pastures, better soils than the south side of the road. As you've seen driving up the driveway, we are based on pumice, so it's really free draining. We need rain every 10 days, so this rain that we've just had has been awesome. Staff-wise, I've got 22 full-time staff that all live on the station. I think there's 14 in the stock team, 6 in the infrastructure, and I've got a permanent farm admin lady, and then Glenn kind of makes up the 22. And I'd like to say that we live in harmony all the time, but that's probably the biggest challenge I see. Like, we talk about profitability and stuff for the industry, but keeping the young people keen on farming basically and getting them involved at a young age to bring them through, and so we've got people to farm the land in the future. I'm keen to take any of your questions throughout the day, and I will be giving some commentary on the way out around kind of farm system and stuff, so I won't dwell on it too much. Just to touch on the beef progeny program, we've committed to 7 years of an AI program with Beef and Lamb New Zealand. We put up 600 cows to AI every year, and we're putting them to three different breeds, kind of split, not quite evenly, but Angus, Simmental and Herefords. For us, it's cool to be a part of the program in terms of, the future of the industry, but also it gives us data on farm, hybrid vigour and stuff. So we can see instantly you've got cattle that are treated exactly the same, but using a Simmental we might be able to grow a whole lot quicker. because it's all about what you feed them, and us as farmers know that. So it's hard to do a trial when you just kind of have that terminal mob, because you might actually treat them better, but in this, we're actually treating everything the same from Angus through to Simi. So it's that's the kind of data that really helps us on farm, along with the stuff that's obviously Jason and the team want as well. But I'll hand it over there if you want, Anna, and pass it on to Jason.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna, and good to see such a good crowd in the room. And yeah, can't really thank Lochinver enough, both for hosting us today, but more importantly for the long-term commitment that they make to helping the industry out in the program. It's, I guess, from my point of view, having spent all my career working, doing science projects on farms, the commitment that people make to being part of these projects is really significant, and without that sort of commitment, we wouldn't be able to do what we do, and hopefully take the industry forward somewhat. So yeah, full kudos to Rimanui and also the other partners that are involved in programs like this. They told me I have to stand in a certain place, and I told them when I start talking, my brain's thinking about what's happening and my legs just do whatever they do, right? I like to move around a little bit. So the INZB program, I won't go much into this, but there's a bunch of components to the program. We're looking at developing indexes to help us select better animals in New Zealand, new trait development, and we'll see an example of that a little bit later when Franzi talks. And then we've got the Beef Progeny Test program and some commercial farms that we're working with. And then our data management genetic evaluation stream, and then really importantly is the industry uptake stuff, because if we don't get uptake, then that's the name of the game. We haven't changed anything, and that's what we need to do. So that's the overall program, but yeah, we'll really talk about the Beef Progeny Test part of that today. And yeah, Anna's already introduced Anna, the other Anna, who actually does the real work. I don't do any of the real work these days, unfortunately. And then Franzi, this is probably only the second time Franzi's given a farmer talk, so go a little bit easy on her. But she knows what she's talking about. Franzi actually has just, about a year ago, finished her PhD working on the data set from a previous bunch of progeny tests that we'd done. So she'll talk about some of the results from that. The goals of this phase of our progeny test program are what we've got up there. Basically, we were asked to provide the data required to compare genetics across breed. And so we've got 3 breeds involved in the progeny test, and we've also got some data coming in from some other commercial herds that will help with that as well. A goal of any progeny test, and this is probably what people think firstly when they think about a progeny test, is it's a drag race between bulls. And to some extent, yes, so it will certainly provide data which will help us to assess some leading industry bulls. So regardless of the crossbreed stuff, there's actually within breed improvement data that comes out of this and can be really important for our industry as well. And I guess to me the really critical part about it is there's 2 things that we do that I guess most stud breeders can't really do in a stud breeding context, and that's, 1, we kill a lot of steers and so get carcass data, and that's really valuable. And the second thing is, I guess, continuing to collect maternal performance data under conditions where cows are challenged commercially. So that's part of it. Steve just talked about crossbreeding, and one of the goals here is to demonstrate the power of crossbreeding. I use the word demonstrate advisedly because there's been a lot of crossbreeding work done over the years. It's probably something we've underutilised in New Zealand, to be honest, in our industry. So as part of these other goals, we'll demonstrate the power of crossbreeding, and then it also gives us a resource to investigate and then roll out potential new traits. We've actually got in this program we've got 2 sites. So Lochinver is the North Island site, and then we've got a site down at Kepler Farm, which is owned by Pamu. And I'm actually going to talk about both sites. In fact, I'm going to talk about Kepler first, and then show you how Lochinver fits into the picture as well. So just so you get the complete picture of what we're doing. So at Lochinver, Steve already mentioned Angus cow base here. And 3 breeds of bulls, Angus, Hereford and Simmental, used over that Angus cow base. Kepler is a little bit different. We've got Angus and Hereford cows there running alongside each other, and in what we call a full cross design, or a di-allele design, to use the technical science term, which no one will understand. But that basically means Hereford and Angus bulls going each way over Hereford and Angus cows. Which is exactly what this slide is meant to show. In terms of the measures, I won't talk about that too much, because Anna's going to run you through the detail of how we what we measure and what we do. So this is the Lochinver design, where you've got some Hereford cows, Angus cows running alongside each other, and then both breeds cross both ways, and retaining heifers, or at least measuring the performance of heifers back into those herds. So I'll just spend a minute talking about why that design down there. So what does it actually tell us? Well, it doesn't matter what the trait is, so I haven't even given it a label here, right? But breeds, we all know breeds are different for different traits. Angus and Hereford are similar types, so they're not that different for a lot of traits, but they are different. And so this is sort of representing, is this thing got a pointer or not? No, doesn't matter. I've been playing with the thing. So whatever the trait is, in this case I've just made up an example where the purebred Angus performance is here, the purebred Hereford performance is here, and the crossbred performance, well, it depends which cross we're making, right? So the crossbred performance is, in this case, and again, it's just a made-up example, but it's to show the principles. It could be weaning weight, it could be anything. In this case, a Hereford over an Angus cow is giving a slightly higher result than an Angus over a Hereford cow. So what are we finding out from that? So first thing is there's a difference between the breeds. That's pretty obvious, right? You don't need to be a scientist to work that out. You don't need to be a scientist to work much of this out, actually. So there's a breed difference, and then we've got a difference between this midpoint here and the midpoint between these two. So this is a real easy question. What's that? What's that difference made up of? What do we call it? Hybrid vigour, right. Yeah. Heterosis, I think I just heard Posey give us the scientific term. Thank you, Dr. Posey. Yeah, hybrid vigour is the common term, heterosis is the science term, and it's the difference. Often people think about, we get hybrid vigour is this difference from the maternal breed, but it's not. It's the difference between the midpoint and up here, because we would expect to get halfway between them anyway. However, what's the difference here? I said before in this example we've got Hereford over Angus cows are giving a slightly different result to Angus over Hereford cows. What's that due to? What's the difference between those two? What's the difference between those two crosses? The calves have both got 50% Angus, 50% Hereford in them, right? The maternal impact, exactly. That's the answer I was looking for. So it's the maternal impact of having a different breed. So in this case, in this made-up example, we'd be saying the Angus cow is giving a slightly higher impact on that than the Hereford cow. Sorry, Posey, it could be the other way around. You won on the breed difference, and so I had to give Angus a little bit on the maternal difference, right, in this made-up example. But so that's why we do these designs with the two-way crosses, is what we're actually trying to estimate here is what's the impact of the cow on that calf as well. And that's actually, that might sound, from a practical point of view, you say, oh, well, so what? But in terms of developing genetic evaluations and genetic information, that's actually quite important stuff for us to know behind the scenes. So that's why we're doing what we're doing at Kepler. So the Lochinver design is a little bit different. So at Lochinver we've got Herefords, Angus, and we've introduced a third breed. Apologies to the Simmental breeders in the room. That's probably a bit yellow, and you probably don't like that colour. But it's on a Friday afternoon. It's what my limited skills could come up with. So yeah. So 3 breeds, all used over Angus cows, and that is, as part of the overall program, helps us a lot. In fact, the overall design here is that we're using the same Hereford and Angus bulls across both sites. So we just select more bulls and we spread them out across both sites rather than have, we generally try and get 50 to 60 inseminations per bull. So for those Hereford and Angus bulls, it won't be quite half and half just due to the numbers, but a proportion of that 50 or 60 will be used at Lochinver, and the other proportion will be used down south. And we get the crosses that we do and evaluate them for the same traits. So just to go back to our goals and to talk about what Lochinver has added to what we're able to do. So in terms of providing the data required to compare genetics across breed, we've added Simmental, which is New Zealand's 3rd largest breed, and probably most commonly used terminal sire, and you can use it maternally as well. So we've added that into the mix. In terms of assessing leading industry bulls and the carcass data part of it, we've got more bulls, more breeds, more options to do that by Lochinver coming on board and helping us out with this. In terms of the power of the crossbreeding, well, before we really just had 2, which are essentially maternal breeds. With Lochinver here, we can add the additional breed type. And we've also got a North Island site, so we can have days like this and make sure it's accessible to people. And then with more numbers, if we're doing any new trait stuff, then we can do that wider and quicker and roll it out. What do we expect to find and this is just from the crossbreeding point of view. As I said before, it's demonstration. What we will find, I'm confident, is that for growth, which is a moderately heritable trait, moderate to high, we'll get moderate hybrid vigour. So normally that's around about 5 to 10% of the mean. Carcass traits tend to be really highly heritable, and because they're highly heritable, we don't tend to get much hybrid vigour in them. So crossbreeding itself the hybrid vigour part of it doesn't do a lot for carcass traits, but introducing the second breed in terms of a higher growth breed or a more carcass oriented breed, that breed difference does quite a bit for carcass traits, or can do quite a bit. Reproduction and maternal, they're hard traits to improve by pure breed breeding, but that's where you get your bang for your buck from a crossbreeding point of view. So you'll get quite a bit of hybrid vigour for reproductive and maternal type traits. So think about that in terms of how you want to use hybrid vigour in your herds. Using that crossbred cow is where you're really going to make the gains. But it can be complex. I'm not going to give an hour-long lecture about crossbreeding systems, don't worry. I'm going to hand over to Anna now, who's going to give you the detail. And as I said, Anna does all the real work, so she deserves all the real credit for it. So.
Right, so welcome everybody. I do know a lot of people in this room already, but for those that don't know me, I am Anna Boyd. I'm the Genetics Operations Specialist for B+LNZ Genetics. So in a nutshell, what that means is I run the operational side of the progeny test, so the crossbreed progeny test, the original beef progeny test that we are still measuring for, and then also the dairy beef progeny test that's based just out of Taupo. I'm also involved in extension and education of both breeders and commercial farmers, and then also heavily involved with the INZB program in whatever aspect I can. So As Jason said, I get the easy presentation because I get to do the fun stuff on farm. I have the pleasure of working with Steve and the farm team, and also down at Pamu at Kepler. I'm on farm for all of the measurements at Kepler. Up here I have Craig Foote, who I would be lost without. He is our saviour, and so he's on farm when the measurements here are taken. He can't be here today because he's on a much deserved holiday. But yeah, he's here, and then I just make an appearance when I can. So in terms of starting with how we choose the bulls, so 2020 AI mating was at Kepler only. So that year we just used link sires. So as I mentioned, for the original Beef Progeny Test, that had its first mating in 2014. And the last mating was in 2020. And so we are still measuring females from that test, but we aren't mating at those sites anymore. So what we did for that first AI mating was actually use sires that had been used already over the years of the original Beef Progeny Test. We had a lot of semen straws stored in storage, so a job of mine was to call around and ask breeders if they were willing to be involved in the crossbreed Beef Progeny Test. And also that year it was heifers only, so we had to make sure that the bulls we used were heifer appropriate. Then in 2021, until now, we went back to the same process that we used for the original Beef Progeny Test, which is where we put a call for bull nominations out in June. And then thankfully we get a number of breeders, of who there's actually a couple in here today, who nominate their bulls up to them. What happens then is we have a panel selection, which consists of people from B+LNZ Genetics. We've got a representative from Massey that links into that dairy beef progeny test. Then we obviously have the farm managers on there as well, so Steve, and then Travis Leslie from Kepler. So on the right there, we've just got an example from last year's mating in terms of the calves that you see today. These are the size of them. This is all available on our Progeny Test website, or B+LNZ Genetics website, so I'll show you how to find that at the end. So with the selection criteria that we use as a panel, bulls used by more than one breeder, which is what we call link sires, are ideal, because what that means is it allows us to combine the data sets. Every year we use bulls from the previous year, just in a smaller amount. So that means we're linking each year's worth of data together for our evaluation purposes. Bulls used in international projects. So we can get this two ways. Sometimes breeders or groups of breeders will nominate a bull that they're using within their own herds. And so that's a way of getting an international sire in. Or from a B+LNZ Genetics point of view, we do purchase semen straws. This is how we link to international projects, and that will help with the development of new traits, as Jason mentioned, and enable us to obviously have that collaboration but also combine data in the future. Bulls offering a diversity in breeding objectives. We want to represent as many commercial farmers as possible throughout New Zealand. And then obviously, again, that links in. So bulls with attributes that offer something to the New Zealand industry. And bulls that will help the participating herds meet their goals, because obviously, we want Lochinver to keep achieving what they are, but hopefully achieve better and reach those goals of theirs, and the same with Kepler as well. So that's why we involve them with the selection. We don't want to select bulls that don't align with their breeding objectives, which are really important from a breeding point of view. So there's a lot on this page, but it's just really to show you the numbers. So I've got Kepler and Lochinver separate here. So 2020 and 21 were Kepler only. We mated 300 heifers only at Kepler the first year. Just some numbers on the side in terms of how many new sires we're using, and we are evenly splitting it between the two breeds down at Kepler. 2021 mated some more. We had 2 years in there, 2 year groups. So we had heifers again and rebreeding heifers. 10 new AI bulls that year, then linking back into the bulls that we used the first year, as I mentioned before. In 22 and 23, the reason why I have 2 years there is because we mate in December at Kepler and then in January at Lochinver. So we're getting slightly less at Kepler because we're not putting any new cows into AI, but why that is because we're starting to mate the females that are born to the progeny test sires. So they are naturally mated for the first 2 years. And you'll see there in 22, 56 of the first females born to the progeny test, which is always exciting, they were naturally mated for the first time. First year, as Steve mentioned, we aim for about 600, don't we, Steve? But we end up pretty close or just over. I think one of those wasn't really meant to be mated this year, so it's always one that sneaks through. So new bulls, links to the previous mating. As Jason mentioned, we use the same Hereford and Angus bulls at Lochinver that we do at Kepler. And then you'll see just, there's no pointer there, but in 23, 24, so this was your rebreeding heifers at Kepler, and then the next lot of females, so that's your 2022 born females. 3 yarding AI program, ABS runs it up here, Excel runs it down in the South Island. They're both a dream to work with. Steve will probably hopefully agree with me. And so all the cows are pre-allocated to a bull by Jason, and so that's just to ensure that the diagram and the that experimentation design works on farm. Some numbers here in terms of Lochinver. So number mated the first year, 586, just over 600 the second year. So average. So what's recorded at mating is cow to AI sire through those allocations, cow mature weight, cow body condition scores. So on the right there, I've just got an example of the parts of the cow that you look at when you body condition score. Today you've got a really cool flip chart that's Sonia actually put together for you all from a resource that we already had. And I've just put together a video on how to do that that will be available through the Beef and Lamb New Zealand Knowledge Hub. I love this tool. So we record that on a 1 to 10 scale. It's the same scale that the dairy industry uses as well. And you'll see that the average weight is relatively the same. And when you round up the average BCS from the last year, it works out the same. This is probably a perfect example of why body condition score is such a great tool to use over live weight, because even though the average weight is high this year, there was an older age group in there, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in as good a condition, because BCS is irrespective of frame size. So we record that at mating. Then at pregnancy testing, we do a cow body condition score again. Love to do it, so keep doing it. We do a fetal age. So a fetal age is when a cow conceived by estimating the age of fetus. We've just got some picture examples on the side there. Jason and I were having an argument about the 100-day, because I think it's a foot, but he thinks it's a body. But it's just to show you, so when you do fetal age, it's ideally done between 90 and 100 days. You can go a little bit earlier, can't you, Jason? But because the smaller the fetus is, the easier it is to age. And you can see that in that picture. And we've got some technicians floating around New Zealand at the moment, especially from the dairy industry, where they see a lot of cows that are very, very good at doing this. And we've always used fetal age as an indicator of, or an indication of birth date for calves, because with the original beef progeny test, they were on large-scale commercial properties, so we were never going to ask them to go around and record the birth date of the calves, because then we wouldn't have a progeny test, to be honest. And Lochinver don't do the same. We do it at Kepler because they're just, got the flat land, a bit more intensive. So, and Franzi has actually written a paper on the accuracy of fetal age in terms of, being able to predict birth date, and we're confident in that. As you go over 100, what happens, the fetus drops, gets too big, so a lot of the time they're trying to age off a foot, Jason. And then as replacement heifers, we actually naturally mate the progeny test heifer sired heifers to bulls of the farm's choice, but we don't AI them, because what we are wanting to evaluate in terms of that data is their natural fertility. So heifer fertility as a yearling, and then heifer rebreeding fertility as a 2-year-old. We grab an 18-month weight, and then we also sample any new cows that are being inducted into the program every year. So just some numbers there. Last year we had 58% success to AI. Anything over 50% we'll take is great. So 58% is a great result. And then overall in calf was 88%. So that was including any cow that then went to the natural mate bulls that followed up after AI. I think that was your overall percentage too, wasn't it, in terms of across the farm. Pregnancy testing's in April, wasn't it? So we're just a little bit off being able to provide those results for you. So pre-calving or post-winter, so it's obviously really dependent on where we are in terms of islands, a month earlier down south, but we measure mature cow weight again and cow body condition score again. Then we grab a yearling weight on any of those animals born to the progeny test size of both sexes, and we also grab a hip height. So this picture to the right there is Craig measuring hip height at Mendip down in North Canterbury actually. At calving, again, as I just mentioned, at the OG sites, which I like to call them, so that's Rangityke, Whangarā, Mendip, Cabafay, and then now at Lochinver, we don't ask them to do anything at calving because they're out in the hill and it would just be a bit too hard basket. So down at Kepler, they wanted to do this, so any data we can get, we will take. They record a birth date for us, a calving assistance score using the assistance score recommended by breed plan. So 1 is unassisted, 2 easy pull, 3 hard pull, 4 surgical assistance, which hopefully we won't get any of. And then 5 is malpresentation, so we do record anything that's breech or coming out sideways. So, and then also deaths. So these pictures are from down at Kepler. On the left there is a first calving heifer, sired by a progeny test sire, and then just a couple of photos of calves and heifers with their calves down there. Calf marking, again a cow mature weight. So even though this is one of the most unrecorded traits within New Zealand in terms of what you see through your EBVs, we record a lot of it. So we also obviously tag all the calves with a really obvious visual beef progeny test, which you'll see today. And then we tissue sample everything for genotyping purposes, so parentage back to the dam and the sire, and also record calf sex and breed. Weaning, mature cow weight again, body condition score, weaning weight, docility score, so we do measure this. It is measured whilst they're in the crush, so not head baled. It's just pretty much really easy to do actually, so you're grabbing a weight, so why not do it at the same time? It is a 1 to 5, with 1 being docile and then 5 being aggressive. You just kind of watch how they behave in the crush. Not too long. We don't want to be there all day. It's just, it is, I know it's quite, depends on the person doing it, but we do encourage, with things like this and body condition score, what we do encourage is the same person to do at least that one time point. But we do try to get the same person, and definitely in terms of the progeny test, record that measurement over the whole duration. So down at Kepler, I have Bella, who's a farm staff, and she does all the BCS now, and I do the docility. And then, so record that. You don't get heaps of variation, but what we are trying to do is obviously, identify the ones that really do stick out in terms of that flighty or aggressive, because those are the heifers that we'll see later on that are probably trying to jump out of your race. And, with the importance of docility in animals in terms of working with them as well, temperament is something that comes out on top now and now again for farmers. So other measurements, you will get to see Bill in action today, fortunately. He's amazing. I hear him I've heard him so many times, and I just always learn something from Bill. I've got to remember it's Bill and Judy, because they are a team, even though she may try to deny it. So we ultrasound muscle scan, which is the same as what your breeders of your stud bulls that you're purchasing do on farm. So that measures eye muscle area, rib fat, rump fat, and intramuscular fat. Grab 18-month weight, structural assessment score, which is also done by Bill, and that will be his presentation today. He may run through a bit about the ultrasound muscle scanning as well, just in terms of different shapes and what you can see in terms of body shape. Pre-slaughter weight, obviously before they're processed, so all the steers are processed as part of the program and any of the terminal heifers. And then the carcass data that we grab at the processing plant, so Fern Farm, in terms of the progeny test so far, and here as well. And so Melissa will be touching that, so touching on that. Carcass weight, dressing up percentage, carcass quality. There is also fertility, which is one new trait that we are starting to investigate as part of the INZB program. I won't go into detail too much about this because Franzi's talking about it as part of hers. Kepler only and Fossil Creek, and on yearling heifers and 2-year-old rebreeding heifers just before mating is when these tags went in. So in late November, I think, wasn't it, Franzi? And information on age of puberty, conception dates, first postpartum estrus. But yeah, I'll leave that to Franzi. And just as I mentioned before, all of the sire lists, all of the reports that we put out are available on the website, on the B+LNZ Genetics website. So I do encourage you to go and have a look. There's a little tab on the top there towards the right that's progeny test. If you click on that, that will take you through to, as I mentioned, the sire lists and the reports. And then there's also the Informing New Zealand Beef tab as well, and that's where Becky constantly keeps you updated with all the news stories, all the new resources, and all the other fun stuff that we're doing as part of the INZB program. And so that's me. Thank you. Oh. Right, so Dan's question is what has surprised me so far? I'm assuming you're talking about the progeny test, Dan, but I don't know. I've been running this for what is it, like 3 or 4 years now. So one thing that does surprise me is how easy it is to AI on farm. So it's just, every progeny test manager so far, especially through the OG as well, so Simon from Mendit when he was there, they all were a little bit hesitant coming into the program, probably about, having AI and the associated labour with that. But the breeding centres that, do this AI with us, they're so easy to work with. They're there to make it as easy as possible. They know what they're doing. And the cows actually, you notice at Kepler, they get used to it and they pretty much, I'd like to say they draft themselves, but that'd be wishful thinking, but they make it a lot easier than what they did at the start. You also, from a commercial point of view, don't necessarily need to AI cows and calves. It could be heifers, but that's probably it, Dan. It's so easy. It's actually a joy to AI, so I look forward to it every year. So that's probably, and it just still constantly surprises me just how the ease of it and how enjoyable it is, and how the animals just, they don't really mind it. The farm team enjoy it. So for me, that's probably, mine.
Are you synchronising?
Yes. Yeah. So the question was, are we synchronising? So which we are. So yeah.
And what's sort of the cost of that?
The cost?
Yeah, and the cost of AI.
The cost of AI depends on the breeding centre that you use. So, the difference between breeding centres, they may charge per cow, which encompasses the labour that's associated with the work, and then also the drugs, synchrony drugs, and obviously, the cost of being on farm and AIing per cow, or it may be the cost per cow plus the drugs. So it does vary, Sam, and it's just because you've got to also remember that outside of the major breeding centres, we also have a lot of private, technicians and independents. So roughly though, and I might be proven wrong in the room, but, I'd say 60 to 70, 80 a cow. Yeah. Plus semen. Yeah.
And
Yes.
one of the traits you were measuring was the hip weight. I was interested in the relevance of that. It's already selected for structure.
Sure. We actually got asked about hip height at Kepler too. So, and Jason and I just ran 4 workshops around New Zealand for breeders on training them on body condition score and udder and teat. And the hip height actually did come up a bit. So the idea around that, and the reason why it came up at the workshop, and it's probably what a lot of other people in the room are thinking about, is this relevant to overall frame size? You know, is there a better way that we can explain the New Zealand beef cow? At the moment, we've got mature cow weight. We want to have a cow body condition score. So because we've got hip height, which is measured by breeders right now, it's not available to most New Zealand beef farmers as an estimated breeding value. But do we combine those three? So do we combine cow mature weight, BCS and hip height, and have that as an index for cow size? Because that's giving you as much of a picture of that cow as you can. So we've measured it since the outset, and you know, it's something that I think that Jason's been thinking about a bit since we had those workshops, being like, you know, do we actually have a look at that and do something with it? Putting words into your mouth, but...
I'll just add to that. Everything Anna said's right. And it is available overseas. They use it as a standard measure, like the American evaluation systems. But fundamentally, the problem is right now we've got mature cow weight. But what you don't know is that cow heavy or lighter because she's a big, tall, slabby, rangy cow and she takes a stack of feed to get back in calf? Or is she actually a moderate-framed, well-conditioned cow that is easy doing, all that sort of thing? So, yeah, and we want one and not the other.
Hi, great presentation, Anna.
Thank you.
I'm Christy, and in a previous life I used to work for NZAL at Dairy NZ. I was just wondering, in the development of your program, have you been able to chat with them, or have they shared, you know, lessons learned, like, wow, if we were going to start from scratch again, this is what we would do differently?
Yeah, sure. This might be a Jason question, actually. So the question was around NZAEL. So that is on the dairy side, right? So we actually have a bit to do with them because when we do the dairy beef progeny test, which is the same nomination process, right? So breeders can nominate their bull and we allocate AB codes to those bulls so that we can use them on farm at Renown. But the question was, you know, have we had any input from them, lessons learned, et cetera, et cetera?
We talked to Andrew Fair from NZAL quite regularly. In terms of lessons learnt, I probably can't think on the spot of anything that really transfers over directly. Dairy cows and beef cows are the same species, right, but they're quite different animals, and we do quite different things with them. But I guess I would say geneticists around all over the world, both dairy and beef, talk to each other a lot about. If you guys knew how much we talk to each other about insignificant little details like that, you'd be amazed. But yeah, so we do a lot of cross species and cross country fertilisation. So yeah, we talk to our colleagues in Australia a lot, more on the beef side and the States as well. So yeah.
Well, that from what my niece was a vet, worked for dairy team, the performance recording for dairy cows has been worked a lot longer than it has for beef cattle.
Yep, that's true. So the statement from the floor, just for the video, was that performance recording for dairy cows has been in place a lot longer than for beef cows. Yep, that's true, but the structures of the industry are completely different, right? So dairy cows get recorded, number one, as a management tool. You know, like the herd testing and all that sort of thing. It's firstly as a management tool. The genetics is an add-on to that, essentially. Really important, as a geneticist, that's incredibly important. Whereas beef, much more extensive systems, you know, we haven't traditionally done that recording. Plus, dairy cows, generally pedigree is known, whereas it's unknown in a commercial beef situation. So that's why commercially, you know, most dairy cows in New Zealand are recorded, most beef cows aren't, because, you know, other than maybe a weaning weight of their calf, but we can't match the calf back to the cow is the thing. We can these days with DNA, but there's a cost to that. I would like to see a lot more of it done. In fact, part of our program, the part that we're not talking about today, but the commercial herds part of our program is looking at how actually can we get a whole lot more data coming into evaluations from commercial herds, And I guess the idea behind that is so that we can feed that data back into selecting better bulls. But also it helps the commercial person, helps them select better heifers, helps them understand which bulls are working for them and which bulls aren't. And yeah, so there's a bunch of other benefits that I think we can get from more recording in commercial herds, if that makes sense.
So is there genetic gain in hybrid vigour within a breed? Say people use pure New Zealand genetics and using, say, American genetics, particularly in Angus.
So
More prolific probably in using external size.
So the question is there more genetic gain? So I'm just trying, I don't quite understand. The question is the genetic gain more by just using New Zealand size or versus international size?
Within the breed?
Within a breed, yep.
Is there hybrid vigour from the New Zealand Angus cattle by using
Oh,
American
yeah.
or imported
Yeah.
genetics?
So the question is, do we get hybrid vigour within a breed by using external, like international Angus genetics, for example, over New Zealand Angus genetics here? The reality is, don't know. No one's ever measured it, and it would be. So it's not going to be as much as you get between breeds anyway. I'll give you that guarantee. So it's only going to be small. That debate exists even within the US, right? Do you get hybrid vigour within the Angus breed? Because the Angus breed is pretty diverse in terms of its genetics, but we don't sort of tend to talk about that much. The impact of international genetics, though, can be really significant, but it's really more about being able to bring in some of the traits that that have been selected for maybe overseas for a lot longer than we have here. And look, to be blunt, marbling's one of them. They've been selecting for marbling for 30, 40 years. We've probably, most of New Zealand, well, we didn't get paid for it until probably 10 years ago. And so now, more and more people are focusing on it, and so that's a good source of quicker genetic gain than just being able to do it within the New Zealand population. But yeah.
Just a very quick question, probably showing my age a bit here, but the word constitution, because everything stems from this cow that you're putting under pressure when New Zealand is mainly to control pasture and things like that. How much emphasis are you putting on that cow through your...
Yep.
You see what I'm trying to make?
Yep. I'd say exactly what you're trying to say. So we're doing a lot of, and there's a bit of a passion of mine, right, is to measure those cows. That's why I was talking about the hip height thing before, about body condition scoring, about measuring her performance. And Franzi's going to talk in a minute about how we can get a slightly more detailed evaluation of her fertility. They are all about the performance of the cow, so we're definitely not forgetting about the performance of the cow. Constitution is a word that I hear used a lot by farmers, and you all sort of know what it means. I sort of know what it means, but I actually don't know how to measure it. Right? So, well, that's one measure. But there's probably a bit more to it than that as well, right? So what we're trying to do is measure all these components of cow performance, which, as a totality, I guess is what you're really talking about when you talk about constitution.
Thanks very much to Jason and Anna.
I should probably quickly introduce myself as well. So I'm Franzi Weik. I've been working with beef and lamb genetics for the last year now. My role, so I work there as a geneticist, so a whole lot of different pieces of work, so working a bit on the genetic evaluation, but also we've got all this data coming in from the progeny test, so how can we, what information can we get from that, analysing the data, and how do we communicate that to farmers and breeders, but also working on new fertility traits or new development of new traits as well, which I'll bring up in a bit. So as Anna said, my role today will be more talking a bit about the outcomes from the original beef progeny test. that we were running. So just to be clear, that's previous work that we've been doing before the INZB program started that Jason and Anna have been talking about. So I won't cover every aspect of what we've been looking at because there were a whole lot of different results, but I'm just going to focus on some of the highlights. And I'm mainly focused on maternal performance traits that are related to body condition score and reproductive performance. So just briefly want to give you an overview of the Beef Progeny Test design, but I won't go into too much detail about that because Anna captured parts of that, but most of you have probably at some point heard about this. So essentially the Beef Progeny Test was run on 5 large-scale commercial farms throughout New Zealand. So 3 of the farms were based in the North Island, 2 in the South Island. They were all big commercial operations and ranged somewhere from between 35 to about 90,000 stock units. The farms were spread across the country just to cover a range of different management strategies and environmental conditions. So we had quite diverse climates across those farms. So with those farms, we actually had a pretty good representation of commercial reality out there. So in terms of Beef Progeny Test design, the project was initiated in 2014, and every year about 2,200 cows were artificially inseminated by a fixed-time AI, and we used a range of different bull breeds out there, which was Angus, Hereford, Stabilizer, Simmental, and Charolais for the AI program. And I think throughout the entire duration of the project, we used about 240 sires, as far as I recall. And so essentially all progeny from matings with Simmental and Charolais sires were killed, whereas female calves from Angus, Hereford and Stabilizer sires went into the breeding herd. The measurement program was relatively similar to what we're currently doing at Lochinver and Kepler. So the steers were assessed for their finishing performance, whereas the heifers that went into the breeding herd were assessed for their maternal performance. So for the heifers that went into the breeding herd, the first 2 years they were naturally mated, and then as 3-year-olds they entered the AI herd. And today what I'm going to be talking about are mainly maternal traits. So what we're actually looking at are progeny that are either Angus, Hereford or Stabilizer sired over Angus and Hereford cows. And today we're still measuring the females on 3 of those farms, as Anna mentioned before, I think, on 3 farms? Just 2. On just 2. But it's slowly coming to an end now. But overall we've got a pretty good representation or pretty good data set out there with records over multiple years. So one of the things we've been looking at was cow body condition score more from a phenotypic, so from a management perspective, and how this trait is related to the reproductive performance of the herd. And it is quite common knowledge that cows that are actually in better condition are more likely to conceive, but we were interested to see how exactly is this cow body condition score affecting reproductive success. And as you can see here, there was a linear relationship between cow body condition score and conception rate. So what that essentially means is the fatter the cow, the higher the conception success rate to a given mating. And in our case, that was a single artificial insemination, so in that case, no natural mating. And you can see that for every step up you go on the body condition score scale, the chance to artificial insemination success increased by about 5 percentage points. So this is quite interesting for those people running AI programs. And what you can see in this graph here is that cows should be at least in a body condition score of around 6 at the time of mating to achieve pregnancy outcomes of around 50% from a single artificial insemination. But artificial or conception rate isn't the full story because usually a cow does get more than one chance to conceive during a mating season. So that's why we also looked at 49-day pregnancy rate. So 49-day pregnancy rate in our case was essentially the probability of conception after the single artificial insemination, plus then at least 2 cycles of follow-up natural mating. And as you can see here, there were diminishing returns for cows in very high condition. and the most value could actually be obtained by lifting those low condition cows in the herd. So from a management perspective, the key message here is to get your animals really to a body condition score of around 7 or higher around the time of mating to achieve good pregnancy outcomes. And this really just also shows the value of drafting off those low condition cows and increasing their feed level to ensure sufficient body condition score gain prior to mating. But how much does it actually take? And essentially, it's easier to put condition on a lighter cow. So, for example, to go from a body condition score 4 to a 5, it only takes about 15 kgs of live weight gain, whereas to go from a 7 to an 8, it takes about 35 kgs. So it is getting progressively more. But if you do want to simplify that and fit a straight line through it, that translates into roughly 27 kgs of live weight gain per unit body condition score. And so by what does that mean for the feed that's required? And obviously the feed requirements is increasing as well. And so here I'm talking about the feed that's required for the live weight gain. So that's over and above maintenance and production. And if we think back about the body condition score graph, that really those low condition score counts, it seems like investing in feed, especially at this lower end of the scale, and you actually get a really good return for your feed. But yeah, one of the other things we've been looking at, we talked about body condition score from a management angle now, but is there actually anything that we can do in terms of breeding for cows that have a higher genetic merit of body condition score? So what we found was that cow body condition score has a heritability of 26%, which just means that about 26% of the variation in cow body condition score can be attributed to genetics. And also there was actually a reasonable sire variation there. So if you look at the graph here, this represents a sire variation for cow body condition score. So essentially the average body condition score of a sire's daughters. So every bar here represents an individual sire, and the breed is colored differently. So you can see there's quite a good variation here, ranging somewhere from a body condition score of 6.5 to 7.3. If you think about an individual cow, that doesn't really seem like a whole lot, but if you actually think across the entire average of the herd, this is a pretty significant shift. So, but what can we actually do with this information? Because currently we can't really select for animals with a higher genetic merit for body condition score because there are no body condition score EBVs available at the moment. But generally, there is this thought out there that selecting for more fat in our finishing animals can actually be used as a tool to also put more fat in cows. So we are looking at how are those traits actually related to each other. So if you do select for positive fat in your young animals, does that also positively influence cow body condition score? And the correlation between those two traits was only about 0.27. But what does that actually mean? That pretty much means that, yes, if you do that, you are likely to put a little bit more fat on your cows, but it is a very blunt tool and not really a great predictor for cow body condition score. But at the moment in New Zealand, it's the only tool that breeders really have. But it's not a great tool, and there's still a lot of unexplained variation. But we do need to remember that cow body condition score is not only related to the fat content, but it's also muscle. So that's why we also looked at the relationship with eye muscle area measured in young animals. But this pretty much told us the same story. So yes, it explains part of the variation, but it is not really a great predictor, so not a good tool for selecting for this trait. So our young animals measures don't really seem to give us a great prediction of what that cow would be like in terms of holding her condition. So what we should actually be doing is looking at body condition score directly and not using fat or muscle in young stock as a proxy. So that means measuring or recording animals for cow body condition score and starting to evaluate it from a genetic perspective. And this is what we're currently working on. So we're currently working on developing cow body condition score EBVs and making them available to New Zealand breeders so that they can be used as a bull selection tool. But I do want to highlight here that when we do select for cows with higher body condition scores, we're not going to increase fertility directly. It is essentially more an EBV for ease of management. So you can use it as a tool to select for cows that are essentially easier to manage to get them to those target body condition scores at mating time. So one of the other things we've been looking at was the possibility of selecting for traits that are directly related to fertility. So those were pregnancy rate and days to conception. And what we found was that there was actually barely any genetic variation or heritability for heifer pregnancy or pregnancy rate in mature cows. But what we did find was that there was actually a reasonable genetic variation and heritability for that same trait that was measured in 2-year-old cows just after their first successful calving season. And this is actually a critical time for those animals to get back in calf. And yeah, that time point has shown the most potential for genetic improvement. So in terms of the low heritability and genetic variation in mature cows, it is some of what other researchers have found as well, but so maybe it means that at some point a cow is a cow once she's actually gone through this challenge of calving and rebreeding for the first time. But we also need to consider that the cows that were part of the Beef Progeny Test were estrosynchronized for the AI program, and also they were culled if they, those cows were removed from the herd that didn't conceive. So that might explain also part of why there was not such a high genetic variation in there. In terms of the young heifers, it is somewhat similar, but maybe a bit lower to what others found as well. And this is also where our new research is coming in. To help us understand those fertility-related traits a bit better. And I was briefly talking about them before. So we did put ear tags, so cow monitoring systems, in heifers and 2-year-olds to allow us to look at some of those fertility traits a bit closer, and also to allow us to break fertility down into some of its component traits. So we're currently still trialing the technology and see how this technology works for us on extensive hill country systems, because so far it's been mainly used in dairy herds, and well, beef behaves a bit differently, so we're still in the trial phase, but we want to be looking at traits such as heifer pregnancy rate and, heifer puberty, conception date, calving date, and postpartum and estrus going forward. So yeah, just quickly want to sum up what I just talked about. So essentially the key message here is that body condition score is important for reproductive reasons. That is from a management perspective, but we can also make quite good improvements using genetic tools. And we've seen that cow body condition score and that fat in young animals is not that great, not that well correlated with each other. So that's why we need to start looking at cow body condition score breeding values, and they are currently in development. In terms of direct measures of fertility, we saw that most genetic potential, genetic improvement can be made in those 2-year-old rebreeding heifers. So we're currently running those fertility trials just to try and understand those traits a bit better and see, going forward what we can do in that space. Thank you.
Thanks, Franzi. I'm just going to finish off just by talking a little bit about fat depth from a carcass point of view, just to sort of round out that fat depth story that Franzi was talking about. And so this here is a graph of the distribution of the fat depths that we got when we slaughtered all our progeny test heifers, steers, sorry. We did slaughter some heifers in there as well, but they were mainly steers. And so this is essentially what the work's saying. So pretty much what is ideal is between 3 and 10 mils of fat, and then we've got the trims and the fats over that. And under 3 mils is too lean. I guess a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but I'm sure there's a few meat company people in the room. They would probably agree that we kill too many animals with not enough fat. in this country, driven normally by the fact that, well, I'm from the bottom of the South Island, right? First frost comes and it's out the door goes everyone to manage feed, but whether they're finished or not. So be interested in meat companies' views of that. But actually the mean that we got was not far off the middle of fat class P, right? So in terms of where do we want to take fat, I would say right now, and this is a complex because you can change your fat depth of your carcass by killing it earlier or later, right? So there's a few factors at play in here in terms of carcass weight, age, time, and fat depth and genetics. But right now we sort of are hitting about the middle. So we don't really want to overshoot and select for high fat depth just to put fat on cows essentially. So that's the flip side of Franzi's message here is if we keep on selecting for fat depth to put fat onto cows, we're actually going to put it on our carcasses as well. In fact, we're going to put more on our carcasses than we will on our cows by a long way. Hence the reason to have a separate way of approaching cow body condition or constitution, to use your word, very similar things. Just having a look, I've only got 3 graphs here, just really brief, quick messages. So what does ultrasound rib fat depth do to carcass rib fat? Well, not surprisingly, it's highly correlated. In fact, I was actually surprised at how highly correlated it is. So these are all progeny sire means, so they're not individuals, they're sire group means. They're bang on the line. But what is actually interesting is if you look at the slope of this line and you look at where it goes, so at 3, this is ultrasound. This is taken at about 18 months by ultrasound. And this is the carcass, which we probably started killing. A handful of them were killed in 18 months, but probably most of them were killed after the second winter in that next season. So it's taken a bit later. And what you find is that as that animal has grown on to be slaughtered, that 1 mil here translates to around, I think I worked out the other day, around about 1.5 mils there. So you're actually putting on more fat than what your EBV is saying, putting more fat on the carcass than what your EBV is saying. And here's another message. We don't actually need rib fat around the outside to get marbling on the inside, which is what we're actually trying to achieve. So from a genetics point of view, we can find bulls out there that give good marbling results. So a bull like this, right, is probably second in the whole, in terms of the carcass marbling. Second bull in the whole cohort there, and yet he hasn't had extreme fat on his carcasses. So, and actually even right out here, you'd say, well, this animal as a progeny mean group hasn't had extreme fat, but there will be, that's a distribution, that's the average of his progeny, so there will be animals going into trims and overfats from that sire. And then just the last message is intramuscular fat EBVs can and have taken us a long way, and that's based on the intramuscular fat scan. It's been a fantastic tool, and we've gone a long way. The Americans and Australians have gone even further than we have because they've been doing it longer. But the point is, the point of this is you actually get paid on the marble score in the carcass, and it's a good tool, but it's not a perfect tool. So that's not that line, those dots don't all sit on that line. And so that's really why when we hear talk about, we want carcass data, that's why, because we can get even better information on the actual money trait that we're getting paid for on those carcasses. So that's just my brief finishing off graphs about fat, just to tell the carcass story around that. So I'll hand back to Anna.
Original cohort of females, how many of them are still in the herd? Because they'll be 7 years of age now in those original 2 herds in terms of length of reproductive performance. Are they still in the herd at 7 years of age in those original herds?
I can't tell you that off the top of my head, sorry Daniel. We are still going back to 2 herds, Whangarā and Mendip Hills, and measuring animals, but 7 is an underestimate. We mated, the first cohort was born in 2015, so they'd be 9-year-old cows now. They'll just about be cull for age next year, I would say. Yeah, 7 lactations, yep, I'll give you that one. Yeah, so the bottom line is no, I don't know the answer to that. We haven't looked at it in that framework. We did try and look at what you call stayability, which is really the question you're asking, right, in terms of how long they stayed. It was actually really hard to get genetic variants in that. And that comes back to what Franzi showed before, is that we're actually not finding much variation in the cow once she's gone into the herd as a 3-year-old plus. We're not finding, the genetics doesn't seem to be having a lot of impact after that point. It's having a big impact early in her life though, at that first rebreeding.
I guess it would help explain that concern people have around constitution. If she's still in the herd after 7 lactations,
yep.
The assumption is she's sound of
yep.
udder and structure.
Yep, so yep, absolutely right. But I guess at the end of the day, in terms of why we cull cows in New Zealand, number 1 reason is fertility. Number 1, 2 and 3 reasons are fertility. And then we have structural concerns, cow body condition, bad udders, cancer eye in some breeds. There's a whole lot of other things. But we never and we'll always struggle to get enough data on all those little components, right? It's death by 1,000 cuts, but reproduction's the big one. Tim?
Jason, is any of the carcass data getting feedback in the breed plan now?
The question was, is any of the carcass data getting feedback in the breed plan now? And the answer is no, not at this point.
Disappointing.
We tried.
Just a question for Franzi, really. Just regarding the challenges, Franzi, of the fertility tax in a commercial situation, and is it a reality for commercial beef breeders to?
Shall I just repeat the question? I forgot to repeat those 2 questions. So.
Oh yeah, so the challenges, it's about the challenges that we're facing with the fertility tax, and if it's viable option to run that in beef herds. We're still learning about the challenges as well, because we started in November last year, but especially on those large scale commercial operations, the challenge is mainly to get the technology to work, because you've got routers that are communicating with the ear tags of the cow. So one of the challenges is you can't cover the entire farm, which is one of the biggest issues, because you're sort of limiting the farm as well and where he can put the cows. But this is also because we found most variation in those young animals. We're currently looking at, we're using the ear tags in yearling heifers in those 2-year-olds, because they're usually a bit closer monitored as well, and they are not all the way out in the hills like the mature cows. So we're hoping that with targeting that age group as well, that we can cover that, but that is one of the challenges. And then, one of the other things we're sort of working through is to refine really those algorithms that are running in the background that are detecting heats, because, well, obviously beef cows are behaving a bit different than dairy cows, and usually behaviors cows are moved to the sheet for milking, so that would be filtered out on a daily basis, because they are going into the sheet every day, whereas for beef cows, that moving of the mob happens every few days. So sometimes we do see heat events coming up when the whole mob is moved, because it's mainly based on activity. So where we just need to make sure that we can filter out those behaviors and that we know what was going on the day, to make sure this is picking up the differences, I think.
What's
Maybe
actually been recorded in terms of those tags?
So they measure mainly activity, eating, and rumination. So activity is sort of high, low activity. But they also have a heat sensor in them to measure the ear temperature. And apparently most of the activity is from the movement of the ear as well, which then it would determine if it's eating or ruminating. I think.
Yeah, I think we're right on the bleeding edge at the moment. But I think it's very quickly going to move to leading edge. And as Franzi sort of said, we've actually got the technology working okay on those farms in terms of getting data. It's the algorithms at the moment in terms of interpretation of that data from a beef point of view. But that'll come. I'm pretty confident they've got gurus and AI, which is artificial intelligence, not our AI, working on those algorithms. So I'm pretty confident they're going to get there, and it's not, there's a bunch of companies out there doing it. Other people, so we talked to another New Zealand company actually that's probably further back in the development cycle, but they were talking about having GPS tags and proximity sensors and their things and doing. Everyone's trying to do something slightly different and get their point of difference and be able to tell you something a little bit better or a little bit smarter or whatever. So it's a pretty exciting area, along with the whole collar thing, the movement. What's the word for that? Virtual fencing. I reckon this is one of the most exciting things that's happening in especially in cattle, in beef cattle for quite a while. Other than genetics, of course.
Awesome. Hey, thank you both very much for that, and Anna as well. So our next move from here is we'll head out on a farm tour. We'll grab...
Yeah. Thank you, and I sometimes wish my last name was Smith or Brown because it is hard to pronounce, so sorry about that, Anna. I don't know a lot of you. Often I know a lot of people in my audience, but just by way of introduction, I'm a veterinarian by training, but no longer sort of seeing sick animals. Sort of 22 years in rural practice, and have had a long background in doing advisory and extension work. I was lucky enough to be involved in helping run the old Manawatu monitor farm programs back when it was Meat and Wool New Zealand, and Sam McIvor was in charge of running those programs. So I actually go back quite a long way with beef and lamb and its predecessors. So when Wormwise was reviewed a few years back and it was decided to establish a job of actually running it, I saw that and I thought I've got to do that. I've spent most of my career interested in parasites and farm management and how they play with each other. So I thought this needs to be me. When Dan asked me why they should employ me, I told him because I don't think anybody else wants to do it as much as I do. So I really hope that as the years roll out with Wormwise that you're really starting to see some differences in how the information comes out at you. You'll be aware that we've got a presence on social media now. What you won't be aware of is that this week we are launching a brand new Wormwise website, which is just, it's like building a friggin' house. Like it's 9 months overdue and 20% over. I don't know what the budget was, but the budget's fine. Your levies have been well spent, but it's it's well overdue. So thank you for your patience. And those of you who used to use the old Wormwise website will have noted that it's been unavailable for quite some time. It was very 1990s and it was very basic. What you're going to have available now, while it's still got all that basic stuff about worm biology and drenches and worm life cycle and all that stuff, it's also got a lot of pages on farm management and how it interplays with worm challenge and cost to stock production. So it's got pages on different farm systems and the risk that they set for worms. It's got pages on things like grazing management, different forages, livestock genetics, and even a page on alternatives to worm drench, which is something people often ask as well. So look out for that. It'll be out really soon. And we will immediately start reviewing that resource, so we will welcome any feedback that you have on whether it's working, how it's working, what's missing, and we'll just keep, it's not, thank God it's not on a stone tablet, we'll just keep building it and changing it to work better for you guys and girls. So that's coming. But yeah, I was asked here today to talk about parasites in beef cattle, and because I don't know my audience, who's a beef breeder? Yeah, cool. And who's a beef finisher? Or finisher and breeder? Yep, so most are both. And who's a rural professional? Yep.
And rural professionals getting asked a lot about drench resistance at the moment. Some of you are nodding, some aren't. Yeah, I mean, certainly drench resistance seems to be the thing that everybody's hooked onto. You either know a sheep farmer who's been affected by it, or you've been affected by it yourself, or you've read about it, and hearing people talk about it. And like drench resistance is, yes, it's an issue, but it's an issue that one is, I'm not going to say easy to overcome, but it can be overcome, and there are farms overcoming it now. And where we see the wheels fall off with drench resistance, it's usually a consequence of something that's going on in that farm system. And most of that can be fixed with system redesign and better nutrition. But so for those of you who are just beef breeders and does anyone just sell all their calves at weaning and go home? Most of you finish your calves as well? Yeah, if you've got a cow breeding herd and you sell all your calves at weaning, you can go and have a cup of tea, because nothing, I have to say, will really be an issue to you. You know, where you don't have a concentration of young stock in one place anywhere on your farm, you're probably never going to have a parasite issue. I think that the role of the beef cow has been debated and talked about, and people try to put numbers around it for years. In terms of maintaining pasture quality on our hills, in terms of providing diversity and providing a good beef animal into New Zealand Inc. The other unrecognised role of the beef cow is a good parasite hoover. You know, a well-fed adult beef cow, and even if she's not well-fed, she's still going to vacuum up way more parasites than she ever puts back out onto your pasture. And occasionally, very thin, underfed, stressed beef cows after a drought or a really hard winter can be affected by parasites themselves, but they're still not contaminating your farm with worm larvae. It's the young stock, those weaned calves, particularly dairy beef weaners that have been weaned at a small, light age. They're the big contaminators in a beef system. So if we either don't have those, or we've got a beef weaner who is weaned a lot older and a lot better condition, they have already developed a level of worm immunity and robustness and resilience because of their size. That means that and you guys know this, that they need a lot less drench inputs than an artificially reared calf. So there's a real place in our systems in terms of sustainability to retain that cow-calf system from a worm perspective. And I don't think that's something we've necessarily factored in before. But yeah, as I said, you know, drench resistance is the big buzzword at the moment, and how do I prevent it, or if I've got it, how do I stop it? But in some ways it's actually the wrong question. Like, the question is, how can I set my system up that worms are less of a cost? Because we know, who's been to a Wormwise workshop before? A few show of hands. Yeah, oh God, Jacinta, you poor thing. She's been to like 3 of them with me. She must be sick of hearing me talk about worms. But one of the exercises that we do in Wormwise workshops is it's an exercise where we get people to guess for these groups of lambs whether the groups have been challenged by worms, whether they've been getting a regular drench, or whether they've only had a light worm challenge. And I won't go into the details, but the message from that exercise is that you can, with regular drenching, you cannot make up all the live weight gain that worms cost you if your young stock are grazing pasture that is highly contaminated by worms. And you know, that kind of hill country brown top stuff, if we've lambed on it, if we've weaned lambs back onto it, or for instance, if it was a dairy heifer grazing system, if we've always got December to May heifers rolling around on that area, it's going to be highly contaminated, and we can drench them all we like, but you'll only make up about 50% of the live weight gain with your regular drenching. 50% of it is gone because every day they're taking in these worm larvae that are affecting their behaviour, their walking, their cutting, their grazing. If they're taking in a lot of worm larvae like that every day, it affects their eating, and it also affects their feed conversion efficiency. So clean feed for young animals. I'm doing a completely different talk than I did to the last group, but clean feed for young animals in terms of having less worm larvae on it is really important. So if you are running those dairy beef type systems or running dairy grazers, looking at how in your system you can provide those younger animals with feed that's got less worm larvae rolling around on it, the better. And that might be cropping, regrassing, it might be integrated grazing and area swaps with different classes of stock. And I guess that's one little warning. It's really easy to have animals in certain parts of the farm because it's logistically easy to do that. What that can create, if it's logistically easy to always have my weaners in the one spot because it's better contour, it's close to the yards, or we grow better feed on it or whatever, that does and can become a resistance hotspot and a worm challenge hotspot both at the same time. So that's one thing to avoid in our mixed cow-calf systems, is always having the weaners on the same place every year. Even our beef weaners that are weaned at a bigger and heavier weight, mixing them up with other stock classes and giving them a fresh pick all the time is a good thing to do. So I was supposed to talk for 15 minutes, and I don't know how I've timed it, but I think we've got time for questions if people want.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know, no one's probably done any work on it from a parasite perspective, but I think, you know, that is one of the big pinch points in our beef systems, is what happens to calves after weaning. And when you can get data from people, you know, in the hill country because I do Wormwise half of the week and then I do just advisory work the rest of the week, and when I can get data from people, those weaners tend to completely stand still for 2 months generally after weaning, or they might be doing 300 grams a day or something like that. So for me, anything we can do to settle those weaners quicker, to grow them as quick as we can through that period, one, they'll keep growing, and the faster that they keep growing, the quicker they become immune to worms, because immunity to worms is a function of both age and size and fatness and all those kind of maturity things in together. So yeah, the less that we can check them at weaning, however we do that, that's going to be a good thing. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
On the back of that, does hybrid vigor mean that we have greater resistance to worms?
Yeah, sorry, the question was, does hybrid vigor mean greater resistance to worms? I can't probably answer that directly with any science. We know that, like the Bos indicus type breeds, like Brahmins and Santas, have a better natural immunity to worms than the British breeds. And I guess anything that matures more quickly by default will have an earlier development of immunity to worms. But we talked about this with the last group in terms of genetic selection. Something I haven't talked about is in terms of being protective against drench resistance, the quicker that, as calves age, the quicker that we can leave some of them untreated, so that not all of the worms coming out of those calves are ones that have been screened by drench. Does that make sense? It's a one way of creating a thing called refugia. We know in systems that have been doing this for a few years that we can get calves that are as young as 5 months of age, that get their last drench at 5 months of age and then continue to grow absolutely fine, where there'll be others in the same mob that are still needing some sort of regular drenching at 15 to 18 months of age. So there's wide variation probably in our cattle populations that we are not measuring or really looking at, but it's something that's an opportunity for sure. Yeah, it's fascinating when you start looking at individual data.
In terms of refugia, how are you making those decisions on what you drench and what you don't?
Oh, the nice thing about this is what we call it targeted selective treatment, where you will be getting your young animals in for a monthly weigh. It does need to be regular enough. You can't do it, every 3 months. If they're coming in for a monthly weigh, you've set a target live weight gain below which anything that falls below that we will drench, and anything that is above that we will not drench. But, you can vary that up and down depending on the feed conditions, depending on the time of year, depending on how contaminated that feed is that they're going to be going on to, depending on how you feel when you get out of bed in the morning. And then, if you've still got animals in the group that, oh, well, she's hit her live weight gain target, but I just don't like the look of her, you can still drench her. Leaving a small percentage undrenched is still going to be helpful. And I think with these systems, you do want to sort of feel your way into them. I have seen and heard of cases where people have just set a hard live weight gain target, and they've said, say anything that grows under 800 grams a day, we're going to leave it. But then they end up leaving 70% of the mob, and they're only 6 months old or something like that, and then everything crashes the next month. So I think you do have to be sensible about how you employ this and don't set a hard line. And as you get a feel for it and it becomes something that you're more comfortable with, then you can play around with it. And certainly as they get older, you can leave more and more untreated. The other really interesting thing we're learning with this, both in cattle and in some work that Beef and Lambs funded looking at doing this in lambs, is that somewhere between 30 to 50% of the animals that you drench will still need a drench the next time and the next time and the next time. So there's something else holding their growth back. It's not worms. But we always presume that, oh shit, they're not growing, so it must be worms. But it often isn't.
There's that word that they used back at the beginning, it's called constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And some will have a better constitution for worm resistance than others.
Yep.
And by doing a selection, those ones breed, not the others.
Yeah, and we've got sheep breeders that have been doing that for 2 or 3 decades now, and they're well out the other side of any cost of that. So yeah, they're something we could follow if we wanted to.
Is there, obviously with the sheep you've got breeding values around Kala and feck and that sort of thing, is there anything happening in that space with beef?
I'm going to throw that to Jason.
So no is the answer other than some stuff in Australia, but it's a question I've been asking people the last month or so, is should we be doing that? Because if we should, we'll look into it.
It was obviously deemed to be value from the sheep perspective, which you'd expect to probably...
Yeah, I'm quite keen that we do have a look at it. To be honest, there was some work done 15 years ago by a guy called Chris Morris, who was with AgResearch, and they basically proved that it could be done, but it just never took off in the industry. And one of the breeders was part of that, John Morrison, who's here, but he was in the other group just before. So all that data sat there, but it never got, I don't think we ever systemised it in terms of enough people taking the measures and then having a system to turn it into EBVs. So we sort of did the research, but then it sort of fell over at the last two.
So it could be stood back up again, though.
Stood back up reasonably.
Yeah. I guess just sort of looking ahead, one of the things I think about too is if we're going to have a whole lot more non-replacement dairy animals that we're being asked to finish on our farms or grow on our farms, is how we manage the parasites in them without ending up, in the same situation as sheep with drench resistance. So it is something to think about from a systems perspective. I'm not sure how genetics plays into that if the mum's a dairy cow, but...
Well, we can still put a good bull across her and better than average. And I guess, I'd be interested in your opinion, Jenny, but I don't think genetics is the silver bullet either, right?
No, I don't either.
It's not the silver bullet.
No.
But we need everything that we can get in the system.
Yeah.
Every tool we can
Yeah.
get. So,
Yeah, and I think most people in the sheep industry would also acknowledge that genetics alone will only get you so far. It's the same with everything, hey? Management, and then genetics. Sorry.
Is there a way that, shouldn't we try and kill the worms before they get in the animal?
Somebody always asks that in a Wormwise workshop, like, why can't we just nuke the pastures with something? I'm sure there are things out there like DDT and things that would, but it's the collateral damage. I do sort of blue sky think about, are there ways that we could target worms? Somebody asked me the other day about spraying dung patches with urea with a drone, because we do know that urea in big enough concentrations dissolved in water will actually kill parasite larvae, and also ticks if you're farming in the upper part of the North Island, but I don't see anything being sort of commercialised anytime soon. And I do know it has been worked on. I had Dave Lethwick with me last week from Ag Research at a Wormwise workshop, and they have done some work using carbenzim, which is the same thing that you spray your pastures with for facial eczema, and that does drop larval numbers on pasture as well. But again, it's sort of a percentage thing, like it doesn't nuke it down, and there's technical hitches with getting enough of it in contact with enough larvae to really change the system. So I think the answer to your question at the moment is yes, you can, but it's through grazing and cropping and all the other things that we're already doing, rather than some whizzy drone flying over and nuking all the larvae, unfortunately. Yeah, it's a nice thought, but I don't see anything on the horizon. Gene editing. Gene editing of the animals or the worms, Matt? Yeah, we have to have some conversations in New Zealand about that, don't we?
As opposed to genetic engineering, gene editing.
Yes, the only thing I can speak with confidence about to do with genetics, genetic tests or DNA tests in worms, is that Beef and Lamb Research have got a big project where they're trying to pull together an international collaboration of parasitology. Is such a tiny discipline, and so there are people all over the world working on these problems of diagnosis and how do we know how parasitized individual animals are, or what species of worms they've got on board. Like if we knew that those calves that you thought needed drenching really only mostly had Cooperia and not much Ostatagia, we might make a different decision about what we drenched with and when we drenched. Same with our sheep. Like if we knew that those were mostly Cooperia and they didn't have much Barber's pole in them, again, we might make a different decision. So there are some tools out there that aren't commercialised, and the research has taken them so far, but nothing's been made into something that you can use. And there's all these things that are just out of reach that Beef and Lamb are trying to pull everybody together to try and get something over the line so we can get some better diagnostics, but not in terms of nuking larvae on pasture.
A few farmers, instead of doing FIC tests, they're doing a larval culture to actually find out what worm it is.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, but larval cultures are highly variable and they're slow. So you're waiting 10 days to 2 weeks to get a result back, which isn't very useful if I, just want my shepherd to go out, grab some fresh poos, and then I want to know tomorrow what product I want to use or whether I even need to drench. That's where these tests would be some sort of quick turnaround DNA thing, and they're not that far out of reach. But yeah, until everybody gets together and we put enough resource in, they're not available.
Afternoon, and thank you all for having me. I actually know very few people in this group actually. For those who don't know me, I am in the agribusiness team in Fern Farms. I'm going to make a disclaimer right at the beginning of this speech, as I am not involved in the procurement team for space, and I'm not involved in the pricing team, so I have no influence over there in current situations. But so I wear many hats at Fern Farms, but one of the hats that I've been involved in is I've been involved with Beef and Lamb Genetics with the beef progeny trial, the dairy progeny trial, and the Informing New Zealand Beef, and actually I sit on the advisory board representing the meat processing sector to make sure that we get a commercial point of view of some of the decisions around that. So, and a lot of that is around, so all of the animals that have gone through those trials have gone through our beef eating quality system. And so what I'm going to do is give you a bit of a talk around our beef eating quality system, how some of those carcass traits sort of affect what the outcomes, and some quite practical tips about what we can do on farm. So 11 years ago, Jace was a year out, we launched our beef eating quality system. So that's been around since 2003. And prior to that being... 2013? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, my maths. Oh, sorry, Jace. Oh good, my maths is a bit wrong at times, but yeah, 11 years ago. And so on the back, how that got to that stage is that we had gone through and done at that stage in New Zealand, and I still think in New Zealand, the largest ever consumer taste testing. So through that, we had about 96,000 samples of beef that had been gone through a consumer taste panel, and of that there were about 13,900 taste testers, and this was over 17 cities throughout New Zealand and the US. And so on the back of that, there was a whole heap of science that we'd done with Otago University around how you set up a consumer taste paneling and people going in and tasting a whole heap of different meat samples, and then we'd measured all these different traits in plant to determine what would be classified as an above value eating quality system. And so that is what we launched our reserve program on. So there's 6 traits that we measure, actually a few steps back. So from that, there's a couple of quite key components around our eating quality system, is that to be able to measure this, we have to put in a cold boning plant. So a lot of the plants, particularly up in the North Island, are hot boning plants. So what happens is that an animal comes in, it gets slaughtered, and then it basically goes straight through to the boning room and it's cut up and shipped out. To be able to measure our eating quality system, we actually have to chill the carcasses down. So we've had to produce chillers that we can cool them down over the night, and then we will go through and grade them first thing in the morning, and then they'll go through into the boning room. So we've developed 3 cold boning plants across the country. So our closest one, we have one in the North Island Pacific over in the Hawke's Bay, and then we have 2 cold boning plants down in the South Island. If I was a grader, I would be preferring to be working in one of our South Island plants, because our graders have to be at the plant to start grading at 2 a.m. in the morning before it goes through our marshalling floor to then go into the boning room to determine what market those carcasses can go through in. So the animal goes through, it gets chilled down over the night, because we have to have it at a set temperature before we can go in and measure those traits. And so some of the traits that we're measuring, and Jace had a really good segue for me earlier on, is he put up a really good little graph on the on rib fat and how that affected our grades that we have in our plants. And one of the things around that, and I did make a comment earlier, is that the 5 farms that were supplying us animals through the beef progeny trial were really quite specific on what they needed to do to meet our value-added programs. And so I actually think that was a very generous bell-shaped curve of the grades that are actually done for animals that come through into processing plants. So I would say that it would probably be well more of a bell-shaped curve, and we would probably get a lot more owls actually coming through, to be fair. So, but why that's really important from a commercial point of view, from a meat processor's perspective, is there's 2 components to that of why we're aiming to, particularly for our prime steers and heifers, we're looking for grade Ps, is that if it's an owl, so that basically means we're too lean, when it's going through our cold boning plants and we're chilling that carcass down, we really want, we've designed the temperature cooling factor to be between 3 and 10 millimetres. So we know that if those carcasses are between that, we know that it's going to chill down, and we can chill it down at a rate that is nice enough that we don't have an effect called cold shortening happening. And so cold shortening happens if that carcass is chilled down too quickly, and it basically means that the meat becomes, the muscle extracts and it can become tough. So we don't want owls coming through our value-added programs, because we can get this cold shortening process. On the other end of the spectrum, if we get T's and F's coming through, there's 2 components to that. One is that we actually basically then have to put in additional labour resources in our plants, and I don't know what you guys are like on farm. Getting labour has been really, really fun. Trying to get additional labour is because we actually have to trim those carcasses down, because we cannot be sending our product out to consumers with fat like this. We have to be really consistent with what those staking cuts look like. So that has a huge impact. We don't want them to be having really fatty ribeye because they don't want to be looking at those really fatty additional cuts of meat. So from a lot of the rib fat stuff is more from a commercial point of view. Some of the other traits that we measure is we measure our yellow fat. So yellow fat's a really interesting trait that measures. From an eating quality perspective, it actually has no impact to whether that carcass is a good eating quality. However, there's huge perception around yellow fat is actually poor animal health, and a lot of this has been driven out of the US. So where a lot of our value added stuff goes, it goes into the US. US markets, everything's come out of feedlots. It's been grain finished, and there's two factors that generally affect yellow fat in the New Zealand system. One is genetics, particularly in some of the dairy, can play a slight impact on throwing yellow fat, but also it's the diet has a huge impact on producing yellow fat. And what we do find is that beta carotene, particularly in lush spring grass, is more likely to produce yellow fat. So with our grass, predominantly grass-fed system, we can adversely produce some yellow fat in some of our carcasses coming through. So doesn't affect eating quality, but it's this perception. And because what we find is all the grain-fed stuff is just white fat. And if you go to the US and you see, all you ever see is all of the fat is white in all of the beef in the US, and that's come out of some of the grain diets. One of the other traits that we also measure is our meat colour. So meat colour is highly correlated to pH, but it's not quite a direct correlation. And so meat colour, again, is if we have what we class as a dark cutter. So that generally means that that carcasses like to be really, really tough. And don't know about you guys, but I do not enjoy eating a tough piece of steak. So we want to really, we don't want high, a dark meat colour. Generally what we find is quite often if we have a very, very dark meat colour, it is very directly linked and, as I said, highly correlated to the pH of that carcass. And so generally, again, high pH, generally tough meat. And so from a farming perspective, pH is something that we can have quite a big impact on farm. Though, to be fair, with all this results that come through, pH is generally not our limiting factor because a lot of it is around good stockmanship, okay? And I do find that generally we have, it's about keeping our animals as calm as possible. One of the really key things around minimising pH is that we've learnt now that we really, if we've got mobs of animals that need to come into our processing plant, we really don't want to have anything boxed 2 to 3 days before it comes in. We want to make sure that you're drafting those animals off from that line. So we're just drafting off from your mobs, don't mixing them, because what happens is that animals are really hierarchy, and then if you mix in 2 different mobs, you're stressing these animals out, and they've got to learn their pecking order. They know who's who in the zoo. And one of the other things that we always find that's quite fascinating, and particularly for those who work a lot with cattle and stuff like that, you do have some of these animals that are pretty highly strung, and if we follow this through to reading our pH in plants, we generally find that their pH isn't high. They're just normally, that's their natural state. What we normally find is the animals around them that they stress out and shoot up the pH in them. So there's quite a few different things around that. One of the other traits that we measure that has quite a interesting influence on our eating quality and how we put it into our system is what we class as ossification. So does anyone here actually know what ossification is? There's a lot of shakes of the head. So ossification is how we measure the age of our carcasses. So it's actually the physiological maturity of the animal. So we don't measure them by dentures. So what we're doing is when the carcass is hanging up in the plant, is that we're looking at the rib cage here, right? And so when an animal is really young, that rib cage is out, and then on the wee tips of the rib cage, and I don't have my books here, is beautiful and white. So a young animal has always got a beautiful white tip, and as that animal ages, that tip turns from cartilage to bone, and it generally turns yellow. And so there's a couple of factors that can speed up that factor. So there's the environmental impact. So if an animal has had a really hard time growing, you know, we've been through droughts all year, it's been winter, we've had no feed, we've just put them out on the back blocks and we've made those animals work really, really hard, it can speed up the aging of that animal. The other factor that also affects the physiological maturity or the ossification rate is the sex of the animal. So it has a huge impact on it. So unfortunately, or for all of you guys in the room, you should always look younger than your other half, okay? Because females, unfortunately, we bloody age faster, okay? So what happens generally is that we find up to 18 months of age that there is no difference between the impact on steers and heifers for their ossification. Once we get past 18 months and if all the traits are exactly the same, we find that heifers generally, they just start to age. So once a heifer starts becoming mature, she just, her aging process, she becomes reproductive, her aging process matures a lot quicker. And if she's been through and actually had a calf, that even just speeds it up a lot quicker as well. So we've had animals come through in a one calf system, and then we'll generally find that they might, unless they've got phenomenal marbling, that they might fall out because of their ossification rate. So, and then the last factor that I'm going to talk about is marbling, and marbling is one of the key components particularly for affecting eating quality. And so for me, when I'm talking to farmers, there's three really key things that we need to think about when we're talking about the effect of marbling. The first one, as I always ask farmers, is like, have you finished those animals? So you've got to make sure that if you're sending them into value-add programs, and we're talking at prime steers and heifers, those animals, they need to be finished. And I'm not a livestock rep, so I don't have to go out and look at what we're looking at from a finished animal, but we need them to be finished. The second thing I always ask them is, have you had those animals on a rising plane of nutrition? So particularly for those last 4 to 6 weeks of the year, of their life, is we want to have them humming. We want to really push that food into them and a really high quality diet to enable it to start to lay down their intermuscular fat. So then the next thing that I generally ask is that, for particularly if animals have been falling out of their eating quality system and it's been because of marbling and they've guaranteed to me that they're finished and they've been feeding them really, really well, is that the next thing is, do those animals actually have the genetic capability to lay down intermuscular fat? Okay? So, and some of the stuff that we've found through the beef progeny trial is that the variation that we can have within a breed is just as much as it can be between a breed. So just because it's black, it does not mean it's going to marble, okay? So we get so much variation. It's more about the genetic capability of that animal to be able to lay down intermuscular fat. I think that's where I feel like I want to finish.
Thanks very much, Melissa. We've still got time for more questions. A bit of time for questions. So has anyone got any questions for Melissa?
So have you proved to Jason, with the bulls he's used in the system, that the ones that had the best marbling genetics came out the best in your system?
Oh, generally yes, isn't it,
Yep.
Jace? Yep.
Yep, in general we've looked at that. So the bulls with the higher IMF ABVs do tend to perform best in marbling, which is exactly what it's designed for. So it's not that surprising, but it's nice to know that it does actually work.
Yeah. And actually the other really key point, particularly from a practical point of view on farm, what we've found is that if all the data come through to hit our eating quality, for prime heifers, optimum weight we want to get those carcass weights to is to 280 kilo carcass weight, and for steers we're looking at about a 320 kilo carcass weight. And when we first started looking at some of this stuff, quite a few years ago now, one of the biggest influences for us to be able to, particularly if we had a lot of these other factors covered, was actually the ability to have a steer from 280 to move up to 320, and the movement of being able to increase our eating quality hit rate improves so much. So that's from a prime steer perspective. To hit our eating quality, that's the optimum aim you want to be getting your carcass weights to. 320 for steers, 280s for a heifer.
Thanks, Melissa.
So you may not know, but Jason may know, what optimum IMF EBV should we be aiming for purchase?
Oh, quite. Yeah, that's definitely a Jason question. What is the optimum IMF EBV?
Or actually, what is the minimum?
Minimum's a hard question to answer. I can answer the optimum.
For the optimum?
Yeah. So first thing is what breed are we talking about? Because not all the EBVs are comparable. But I would rephrase the question as, can you have too much? And I would probably say
yes.
No. I know why Melissa's saying this, because she's thinking about can you have too much in the carcass, and yes, you will get to a point where it's going out of spec for what you want.
We want, maybe not for some of the other companies.
From a genetics point of view, I would argue that, especially on a grass-based system, we can then kill that animal earlier and lighter and still get that marbling if it's got super marbling genetics. So, how you use that would be more the question. So, yes, I can have a really super high IMF EBV, but not annoy Melissa because I can just kill it when I think it's going to be the right.
And it's a really good point, because in New Zealand, and particularly for us at Fern Farms, we want everything to be grass-fed, and you guys who farm will know that it's really, really hard to get to some of this stuff on a grass-fed system, because the quality of the diets doesn't allow the IMF, or that you need a high ME to be able to lay down some of this stuff from a feeding perspective. So you always find that any genetics that have got very, very high IMF, you're going to express it a hell of a lot more under a grain-based diet. But for us personally, we need our stuff to be grass-fed. Other companies may be different. So.
Your high-quality program, are you selecting animals from your total kill for that?
No, so we have 4 beef programs, and farmers have to sign contracts to go into them. So, and because there's premiums associated to that, so they definitely are pretty focused on what they need to meet around some of the specs. There's been a huge education for some of our farmers around what they need to do, and our top guys are phenomenal doing it, and they really are. Some of our straight finishers who are buying in, they can follow things all the way back, and they can go, I don't like to buy stock from this farm, I want to buy it from this farm. So some of our top finishers who are coming into our programs are definitely looking at that. And just a side comment probably from a little bit of what, just to follow on some of your cool commentary this morning, Sam, is that for us, it's tough out there at present, but for us, our value-added stuff has been, we're still being able to generate really good margins out of that. The commodity stuff for us, it currently is super hard, but our stuff that we've got into our programs, we haven't lost any of that market. It's still paying the same. It's just, there's so much of it that's in commodity. So there's those customers are still buying, our demand for that, and our prices for those are still good. So.
Question Sowden.
So how fast are these markets for your premium products growing, and do you need as much as you can pay?
No, to be fair, it has to be very managed. So, and we're a market lead company, so if we don't have that market, we're not going to go out and extract it. And we've also got to take into account, I was explaining to the ladies on the way out, the complexity is that we're not just prime killing. We've got bulls coming through, we've got cows coming through, we have to coordinate the processing plants to be able to do that, and the packaging and stuff like that. So it's a lot of this is you've got to be booked in. There's specific days that we will process for some of our programs. So we will only grow the programs, and we've got 4 beef programs. So as we get more customers, because we have to be market led, we've got to be driven by our customers to be able to pull stuff through, and and it is growing, but possibly not as fast as everybody else wants it to be. But we've got to be very manageable in that.
Excellent. Hey, we better wrap up this in the interest of time. So let's show our appreciation to